Pennsylvania Department of Art History in 2017, and a BA in Art History and English from the University of Lausanne. At present, she is working on a book project titled Animated Geographies, Abstraction in the Body After the First World War, which examines the intersection of geometric abstraction, physical motion, and sensory stimulation in post-World War I avant-garde art. She has received fellowships from the Museum of Modern Art, the Staatliche Museum in Berlin, as among many others, and has curated exhibitions at MoMA, the Institute for Studies on Latin American Art, Monaco's Palais Princière. Her work has appeared in the Oxford Art Journal, Yale University Art Gallery Bulletin, and After Image, as well as several peer-reviewed journals, exhibition catalogs, and online publications. Our next event will happen on February 21st as an exclusive members event. If you're interested in becoming a member, please see my colleague Miranda Powell. And after that, on March 2nd, we'll have a conversation with Hubert Neumann, whose collection you see on the walls here, and artist Xavier Villon. So please join us for that. And please join me in welcoming Dr. Francesca Ferrari to the stage.
New research on the work of the Swiss artist Paul Klee, especially the works that he dedicated to machines and automata. There are 4 works by Klee included in this exhibition. You can see them over here on this wall to the right, and I'll be showing some more. So without further ado, here is some new work on Paul Klee's automata. In the spring of 1921, the artists Julia and Lionel Feininger met their new colleague Paul Klee, who had recently begun his tenure at the Weimar Bauhaus. In a commemorative text they wrote after Klee's death in 1940, they recalled the cabinet of curiosities that used to be his studio. I quote, "Klee loved to collect about him small objects of beauty in themselves of no importance, such as wings of butterflies, shells, colored stones, strangely formed roots, mosses, and other growths. These he brought home from his lonely wandering about the countryside. Other objects in his studio, products of his spare moments, were contraptions pieced together of flimsy materials such as gauze, wire, and bits of wood, some capable of moving by draughts of air, others manipulated by a tiny crank." This vivid picture, and this is a photograph of Klee in his Weimar studio a few years after the date of this quote. This vivid picture of Klee's working space sheds light on his impulse to surround himself with fragments of the natural world. It also calls attention to the contraptions that he assembled out of simple materials, some of which swayed under the action of atmospheric effects, and some of which featured mechanical extensions such as iron cranks. None of these handmade constructions survive. Their ephemerality suggests that much like the animal, vegetal, and mineral relics that Klee collected, they were, quote, in themselves of no importance. To the artist's peers, they appeared as a result of his spare moments, ostensibly little more than diversions from his paintings and drawings. But were they? The Feininger's posthumous account points to an underexplored facet of Klee's oeuvre that emerged around the same time they witnessed the eclectic studio display. That is, the works on paper that Klee dedicated to automata and mechanical apparatuses between 1920 and 1922. These works feature 2-dimensional machines that, similar to their now lost sculptural counterparts, are coextensive with Klee's deep fascination with nature. I propose that this chimerical composition compositions, along with the artist's writings from the same period, disclose Klees' unique understanding of machines as systems that are not only compatible with the workings of biological organisms, but also capture the physical qualities that he attributed to both living beings and formal elements such as lines, planes, and geometric shapes. In this talk, I argued that Klees' representations of mechanical devices bridge nature and technology, distilling the movements, sensory activities, and interactions that he thought propelled both life and art. Klees' corpus of machining drawings have received scarce attention. Scholars have rarely assessed his dogma through the lens of the machine. Instead, the literature on the artist privileges interpretations that center introspective and imaginative qualities, which are evident in some of the work on view, some of the works on view in this exhibition. Here are two examples from the wall. Ever since the late 1910s, art critics and dealers consistently framed him as a visionary able to represent fantastic scenes. From 1925 onwards, the surrealists claimed him as a precursor to the movement based on what they perceived to be his spontaneous inventiveness. This early reception fostered Klees' reputation as that of an artist moved by intuition rather than as an acolyte of the industrial age, one which suggested that he neglected or even repudiated the rampant mechanization that altered modern life. Analysis of the watercolor Astral Automata, for example, highlight the otherworldly and uncanny allure of three mannequin-like figures immersed in a cosmic landscape rather than the mechanical qualities evoked in the title. To be sure, this is one of only a handful of works in which Klee references automata, machines, and industrial apparatuses. Here, as in most of these rare machine works, rough textures and enigmatic subjects diverge from the sleek machine aesthetics widespread in avant-garde art circles in the late 1910s and early 1920s, which favored the smooth materiality, modular structures, geometric forms, and functional operations of mechanical devices. It is not surprising, then, that publications and exhibitions on Klee have isolated his work from those of other avant-garde artists who explicitly engage with industrial design and mechanical engineering, including fellow Bauhausler like Marianne Brand, Laszlo Moholy-Nagy, and Oskar Schlemmer, among others. However, works like Astral Automata show that Klee did respond to the fantasies and anxieties that accompanied depictions of automata in 19th and early 20th century German-speaking culture. For instance, he read the biography of the playwright Heinrich von Kleist, whose aspiration to replace human dancers with motorized marionettes had gained wide recognition. He was also an avid reader of the writer A.T.A. Hoffmann's fairy tales and repeatedly attended the operatic adaptation of the story The Sandman, which features an early lifelike automaton. However, in what follows, I suggest that unlike his predecessors, Klee did not envision superhuman surrogates for human bodies, for animate bodies. Neither did he aim to mimic, replace, or improve upon the physical properties of living beings, as contemporaneous cultural projects did. His machinic works stand at odds with, say, the notion of biomechanics pioneered by the theater director Develop Meyerhold, or the theories of scientific management popularized by engineer Frederick Winslow Taylor and industrialist Henry Ford, all of which sought in different ways to endow biological organisms, and especially human beings, with the momentum and control of machines. They also depart from the proto-robotic figures and pseudo-automatic techniques that peers such as Anna Huck and Max Ernst embraced during this period to critique the controlled rationality of machines and the effects of mechanization on modern subjects. And here I'm showing two examples that are included in the show. They're just behind this screen, so I invite you to peek behind later. Rather, I suggest that Klee approach machines as lenses through which to visualize the embodied processes and relations that, to him, encompass both nature and technology. One detail that connects his precarious machines to Klees and Hoffmann's enchanted creatures, and to many of the contraptions that appear in Huck's and Ernst's work, suggests as much. Just like the three-dimensional assemblages that the fine words remember scattered in the studio, some of the devices that grace his works on paper achieve lifelike motions through the activation of a hand crank. This simple mechanism, often found in mundane contraptions such as wind-up toys and sewing machines, demands the participation of an external operator. It provides a thread that weaves together the ideas of animation, embodiment, and interactivity that come to the fore in Klees' automata. Such a crank emerges in what is perhaps the best known of Klees' machine pictures, the 1922 oil transfer drawing twittering machine in the collection of the Museum of Modern Art in New York. And I'm showing you two images. The one on the right shows the work mounted on a cardboard support. This famous work depicts 4 schematic birds outlined in black oil and ink against the large shades of a watercolor background. Jewel tones permeate the surface with stains of deep pink bleeding from the margins to define a cavernous space suffused with atmospheric blue. The composition is rife with material accidents typical of Klees' oil transfer technique, which consisted of laying a pre-existing drawing over an oil-coated sheet and retracing it with a stylus. The birds twitter while suspended above what could be a rectangular ditch or platform perched on an undulated shaft that culminates in the trunk. They thrust upwards in an agitated manner, with commas and an exclamation point ejecting from their beaks in ways that allude to an imaginary score. Their diagrammatic anatomies are far from naturalistic. Wiry limbs and tails intersect in a crisscrossed web that makes some of the birds appear multi-legged. Their globular heads, too, vaguely recall musical notes so that they seem to both perform and personify a melody inaudible to viewers. The crank, however, suggests that they are part of a larger apparatus set in motion sometimes prior to the scene depicted. The shaft is but one component of a scaffold that connects the birds to the rectangular space beneath them. 2 small wheels mounted on the structure appear to be spinning, as does what looks like a pair of bellows or a governor equipped with 2 triangular vanes visible at center. Despite the diagrammatic character of the drawing, the workings of the machine remain unclear. What propels the motion of the structure, hardly disconnected as it is from the crank's implied rotation? How exactly does the mechanism work? And more importantly, how does its activation relate to the birds' bodies and their ability to produce tweeting sounds? Analysis of twittering machine tend to gloss over these questions and focus instead on its potential critique of mechanization, denouncing it as an instrument that co-opts human or animal creativity. Many describe Klees' twittering device as a music box able to evoke birdsong, and indeed, Klee had depicted sound-mediating machines before. Just a year prior to completing this work, he executed a drawing titled Apparatus for Mechanical Music. Reminiscent of a phonograph, this machine parodies technology that do not just promise to propagate acoustic stimuli, but also presume to appropriate the art of music. Klee, a virtuoso violin player who grew up in a musical family and frequently attended live concerts, was less than sympathetic to such endeavors. In fact, he was so mistrustful of sound machinery that he avoided using the telephone and refused to install one in his residence for years. According to this line of argument, the machine at best stifles, at worst adulterates the natural gifts of biological organisms. And accordingly, in twittering machines, the bird would serve as emblems of a spontaneous mode of art making that clashes with the demands of technology, their performance forcibly systematized into a clockwork mechanism. This underlying theme of captivity is the subject of a 1968 article by the Renaissance art historian Maurice Shapiro. Shapiro identifies references to centuries-old strategies used to ensnare birds as he likens Klees' contraption to, quote, a machine in the Latin sense of a trick or trap, a machina, end quote. Rather than a ditch or platform, he sees the rectangular area beneath the birds as a partially raised mesh under which hunters traditionally place baits. In turn, the feathery ends of the birds' tails and necks emerge as fledged arrows piercing their bodies, and the sharp spines ejecting from their beaks as hooks and spears. Shapiro further emphasizes this image of entrapment by suggesting that a menacing mist of blood-colored pigment encroaches upon the birds from the edges of the composition. This ominous notion that twittering machine might represent 4 trapped creatures facing imminent danger remains a popular one. And MoMA has been largely responsible for perpetuating this view, at least ever since the curator John Elderfield endorsed Shapiro's theory in a text that analogizes the drawing to, quote, an image of nature's bondage, end quote. The museum's latest description of this work, published on occasion of its 2019 expansion, likens the, quote, crazy contraption to a violent marriage of nature and industry, asserting that the machine debases the bird's capacities for movement and song by turning them into activities of enslavement. The seamless integration of organic and inorganic elements that distinguish Klees' Weimar studio turns here into a clear that I disagree with this interpretation. Yet, it should be noted that such a somber reading, especially by critics in the United States, echo the drawing's troubled provenance. As art historian Charles Axtausen has discussed, before entering Neumann collection, this work was embroiled in one of the darkest episodes in 20th century cultural history. In 1933, the recently established National Socialist government removed it from public view at Berlin Nationalgalerie, where it had belonged to the first public collection of modern art in Germany for about a decade. As part of a campaign that ridiculed, censored, and persecuted avant-garde artists like Klee, who that same year left Germany for his native Switzerland, the Nazi Ministry of Propaganda later displayed the drawing in two exhibitions meant to underscore the ideological and moral corruption of modernist art. In 1936, Twittering Machine surfaced in the Great Anti-Bolshevik Exhibition, which disseminated anti-communist propaganda, and in 1937, it prominently featured the infamous Degenerate Art exhibition alongside 14 other works by Klee. You can see the corner of the Degenerate Art exhibition dedicated to Klee, the Twittering Machine circled in blue. And of course, Klee was not the only artist represented in this show. Hundreds of other artists, modern artists were included as well. Their works being sequestered from German museums. The Nazi government considered such works to be symptomatic of quote-unquote cultural decay and ultimately liquidated them either by selling them on the international art market or in some cases by physically eliminating them. In the spring of 1939, MoMA's director Alfred H. Lawrence Jr. managed to acquire the drawing through the intercession of Kurt Valentin, a German Jewish dealer who directed the New York branch of Berlin's Buchholz Gallery and who played a central role in the resale of so-called degenerate artworks. Shortly after the sale, Valentin borrowed Twittering Machine for the largest retrospective of Klee's work in the United States up to that point, which was jointly held at the Buchholz Gallery and the adjacent Wheeler Gallery in the fall of 1940. And it was in the small catalog accompanying the show that the Finders text was first published alongside an essay by MoMA curator James Johnson Sweeney. Sweeney's text provides a foil to the wonderful strangeness that imbues the Finders' memories. In his essay, Sweeney distinguished the inventiveness, liveliness, and free creativity of Klee's works from the rigid hierarchies and discipline control he thought defined both machines and authoritarian states like the Third Reich. I quote from Sweeney's essay. We see a world torn between the two great forces, democracy and totalitarianism. Today, a planned organization to which all constituent units or elements are subordinated has the apparent advantage of efficiency. But the inelastic, inorganic, anti-vital machine attitude must give way to a system which will allow for the free development of sensibility and intelligence. End quote. So here Sweeney argued that in art as in politics, the strict organization typical of mechanical systems was inseparable from lifeless automatisms hindering creativity and critical thinking. Even more explicitly, an anonymous reviewer of the show in Time magazine claimed that some of the works on view in the Buchholz-Wheeler show, quote, like the Twittering Machine, had an odd, disembodied relation to mechanical objects, which apparently connected them to, and I quote again, the red-cheeked, goose-stepping Nazis who after 33 scrubbed individualism from Germany's art galleries, end quote. For this writer, as for Sweeney, the programmed automatism of machines were synonymous with the subordination of German subjects to the all-encompassing authority and cultural repression of the Nazi party. By contrast, Klee's whimsical works modeled a democratic means of artistry as well as a life-affirming aesthetic that presumably served as an antidote to the machine attitude that plagued Nazi Germany. The reception of Twittering Machine and Klee's work at large emerged at a moment in which the United States had just begun providing significant military supply to Allied forces. And as such, it should not be taken at face value, not to mention that Klee executed Twittering Machine over a decade before Adolf Hitler appointed himself leader of the Third Reich. One might argue that the artist could well have evoked helplessness and violence in response to earlier traumatic events. The First World War, for example, forever changed the relationship between nature, human beings, and technology in ways that potentially resonate with the subject matter of the drawing. After all, earlier compositions such as aerial combat equate birds not unlike those in Twittering Machine with military airplanes, reflecting Klees' wartime experience as a military clerk on a Bavarian airfield. Klee could have fashioned the crying birds after the thousands of individuals caught in the crossfire of political machinations, or more literally, the war's destruction of entire ecosystems. However, such interpretations neglect to account for the drawing on which Klee largely based the composition of Twittering Machine. Rather than in the battlefields of World War I, this idyllic scene shows the four birds frolicking on a tree. It positions the improvised concert in a flourishing wood where wandering hikers might chance upon a melodious spectacle, one which Klee would have encountered during one of his long walks. The Twittering Machine, then, appears as a device inspired by and not incompatible with the simple marvels of the natural world. Indeed, viewers in the 1920s and early 30s responded to Twittering Machine with curiosity and surprise. The art critic Billy Wolfram, for instance, remarked upon the strange chirps of the birds, while the writer Paul Klee praised the combination of, quote, musicality and painterly magic that he thought exemplified Klees' overall worldview. Ludwig Justi, the director of Berlin's Nationalgalerie, responsible for acquiring the drawing in 1923, described it as an astonishingly unreal machine, and Barr, his counterpart at MoMA, called it captivating. Whether struck by the work's bizarre subject matter or bewitching allure, Klees' contemporaries did not seem overly concerned with its potential allusions to violent events, whether recent or looming on the horizon. And they had good reason. As Justi revealed in a 1931 text, Klee claimed to have fashioned Twittering Machine after a 19th century automaton that reproduces natural organisms precisely with the purpose of generating wonder in the beholder. This extravagant automaton was and still is on display at the Deutsches Museum in Munich, the city where Klee resided before moving to Weimar in 1921. It was the brainchild of the French automaton maker Blaise Bontemps, who specialized in producing the illusion of birdsong through ensembles that trick the ear as well as the eye. It consists of a faux tree made of painted plaster and wire, which teems with 4 pinned butterflies and 9 taxidermized birds. A large vitrine surmounts the scene, which in turn is supported by a wooden base equipped with a rectangular glass pane that reveals a clock-like mechanism. Like the Twittering Machine, it also features a removable hand crank. So I'm showing a little video made by the Deutsches Museum at the left, a little corner that shows the automaton at work, and then at right is a model of the mechanism of the automaton to show you roughly how it works. I'm sorry, there should be like chirping sounds, but you can imagine that. Like the Twittering Machine, it also features a removable hand crank that allows for the rotation of a horizontal shaft connected to gear wheels. The latter set in motion levers and pistons attached to strings that move the animals' bodies, simulating lifelike gestures such as beaks that open and close, wings and tails that flutter, and heads that rotate. At the same time, a spring activates bellows that channel air through a pipe and then a valve cap, so that the machine emits a discontinuous sequence of sharp whistles akin to chirping. Viewers like Justi perceived this object as fanciful, yet it belonged to a vast genealogy of machines that simulate the animation of natural organisms, often emitting sounds to reinforce their resemblance to living beings. In particular, automata in the guise of birds had intrigued European viewers and beyond since at least the early modern period, achieving great popularity between the late 17th and 19th centuries. But as cultural historian Jessica Riskin points out in her book, The Restless Fox, which is a fantastically I recommend it to anybody. While in the Renaissance, the primary purpose of such devices was to achieve lifelike qualities that amaze and unsettle viewers, automata that proliferated in the so-called Age of Enlightenment, for example, Jacques de Bouchanfon's famous digesting duck, strove to present the material world as a perfect machine, a great clock, subject to the design and activation of an external intelligence. The glass pane in the base of Bontemps' device speaks to this latter ambition. As it unveils the machinery that enlivens the taxidermized birds and butterflies, this small window underscores the rational workings of both artificial and organic life, not to mention the ingenuity of the machine's creator. The transparency of the mechanism is therefore both visual and ideological. The glass offers insight into Bontemps' mechanical orchestration of a quaint forest scene, implying that nature itself is rationally constructed and might therefore be known and controlled. But Klee resisted this paradigm. His picture subverts the mechanistic worldview that the automaton promotes, interfering with Bontemps' simulation of natural life and his aspirations to visual mastery. The rectangular ditch in the drawing resembles the glass pane in the automaton, and the quadrangular area of light blue mixed with pink around the birds does recall the space of the vitrine. However, the window in Klees' machine is vacuous and fails to yield any revelations as to its inner workings. Neither do the vague contours of the vitrine convey a clear, circumscribed scene susceptible to the observer's appraisal. The artist's handling of materials, too, communicates opacity rather than transparency. Layers and stains of watercolor occlude the surface of the paper, oil smudges across the composition recall smeared glass, and borders of gray gouache enclose the scene within a murky frame. In other words, Klee invokes Bontemps' glass pane and vitrine only to challenge the supposed permeability of the scene to sight, analysis, and surveillance. Instead, his embrace of opaque surfaces calls attention to the physicality of the encounter between the beholder and the singing birds in the here and now of lived experience. Other features summon a mode of perception that transcends the visual, further highlighting the multisensory appeal of the machine. For one, the random constellation of oil smears in the otherwise cleanly drawn composition conjures tactile associations. These marks of attrition reveal the haptic nature of Klees' oil transfer process. One can evince the pressure of the stylus and the rubbing of overlapping sheets through which the picture came into being. Moreover, the bird's virtual twittering seemed to extend beyond the limits of their scrawny bodies. The sound not only dwells in the onomatopoeic title of the work, the twittering machine, but also exudes from Klees' use of color. Even if he deprived the four figures of the exotic plumage of Bontemps' stuffed animals, the lush hues that spread throughout the background sublimate the vibrancy of their coats as if to mirror the vivacity of their oral feats. Redolent of the synesthetic theories that Klee and like-minded painters, Kandinsky for example, have been exploring for years, the composition mobilizes an affinity between chromatic and musical harmonies to give visual forms to the immaterial texture of the bird's song. As visual manifestations of corporeal actions, these formal and material details correlate the artist's creative effort with that of the birds. All of them, Klee implies, use their bodies to shape substances such as oil-coated paper and air into aesthetic products rife with multisensory connotations. It might be tempting to see these bodily qualities as signs of the unsystematic disposition of Klees' automata, cementing the irrational connotations often attached to the artist's overall oeuvre and encouraging comparisons to the dysfunctional machines found in Dada and Surrealism. But Klees' imagined mechanism works insofar as it highlights the complex interplay of connected forces that triggers the seemingly simple act of twittering. Unlike Bontemps, the artist did not locate the source of the bird's performance in a disembodied motor relegated to the machine's base. Instead, he blurred the line between the schematic anatomies of the animals and the geometric components of the apparatus to underscore their interrelated operations. He did so by defining both organic and industrial structures through marks that convey the visceral and interactive nature of birdsong. The interwoven limbs of the quartet suggest compact unity as well as concerted labor, and the continuous lines that extend from each bird's body and wrap around their eyes intimate a continuous jolt of energy, as if they ignited some form of combustion. Far from being entrapped in the machine, the four performers constitute its animating power. Still, the birds are hardly the only active agents at play. The triangular device at the center appears to move under the same airflow that passes through their windpipes. Whether it stands for a vane susceptible to atmospheric changes like the mobiles the finders observed in Klees' studio, or schematic bellows similar to those found in Bontemps' automaton, this device underscores the birds and the machine's mutual articulation of sound waves through the interplay of air and movable structures. The handprint, too, summons the presence of yet another participant in the action, albeit an invisible one. In the absence of any evident operators, the handle emerges as an invitation for the viewer to virtually step into the picture and contribute to creating the quartet song. Although the birds seem to sing of their own impulse and inject a flow of energy into the machine, their tune does not exclude other contributors. On the contrary, they galvanize the apparatus in concert with external power sources. And in this again, Klee departs from Bontemps' automaton. If Bontemps revels in the illusory animation of creatures that are, in fact, dead, Klee's drawing projects unrestrained vitality on organic and inorganic entities alike, integrating them into a nexus of physical forces. This reciprocity recurs in other machines that Klee depicted during the early 1920s, further undermining the irreconcilability of natural and mechanical forces that later commentators have read into the machine. Consider a small experimental machine, an oil transfer composition, the one on the left, that Klee fashioned after an eponymous pen drawing, right. Though more abstracted than Twittering machine, this playful vignette similarly integrates mechanical and animal components. At first, it looks like a generic assembly of pulleys, levers, and wheels, but the scribble word switch or twit, visible at upper left in the drawing, signals the presence of a bird in flight, while the slender silhouette of a cat at right becomes legible along with meow or meow. Such phonetically pneumatic signposts help identify the two schematic animals within the picture, and perhaps even imagine the sounds they emit as part of the cartoonish chase that the contraption stands for. The bird, reminiscent of an airplane, seems to have just taken off, whereas the cat appears to have landed in the spot previously occupied by its prey. And I've watched more cat videos than I care to admit to make this point. The hand crank, which as in Twittering machine juts out of the device, elicits a cycle of mechanical reactions that reflect the kinetic energy of the cat's frustrated hunt and the bird's nimble escape. Even more than in the moment drawing, here it is apparent that the function of the machine is not to systematize or contain the two animals' actions. Rather, the device is reminiscent of an interactive toy that implicates the viewer, opening the scene to the interventions of agents other than its animal protagonists. It provides a framework to visualize the physical exploits of animal creatures such as jumping, flying, emitting sounds, turning the handle, as well as their relationships with one another, taunting, hunting, escaping, thumping. Even in the absence of discernible figures, Klee's contraptions associate the interconnected movements of machines with the actions of embodied subjects. Apparatus for delicate acrobatics, for instance, at left, situates a series of athletic feats within an unpopulated construction equipped with props commonly found at the circus, such as a makeshift tower and suspended ring. Although no acrobats are visible, subtle details hint at the precise stunts promised in the title. A ball defies gravity, a coiled cable swings in the void, and a spiraling wire traces a somersault in the air. The direction and order of such acrobatics remain obscure, as the device's open-endedness accommodates each object's potential for a wide range of motions. Still, mechanical elements take on embodied connotations, the moves of the apparatus looking as delicate as those of trained gymnasts. Another play of balancing and displacing acts unfolds in the industrial setting of plant for machinery, where cranes and weights, so this is the word, right? Where cranes and weights seemingly transfer material from the ground up. Sparse indications of brick walls suggest a half-erected machine plant, allowing viewers to simultaneously look at its exterior and interior as if it were an anatomical illustration that unveils selected recesses of the body. Despite the privileged look that Klee offers into the bizarre machine, its precise purpose remains unclear. Again, no clear sense of progression is obvious, although arrows and lowercase letters indicate various stages in a mysterious production cycle. Whatever the case, the actual subject of his work appears to be the movement of energy and matter from one place to another within a coordinated multi-part scheme, one which recalls the systems at work within animal bodies. Despite its purely mechanical focus, the drawing hints at the shared potential of machines and bodies to produce, mediate, and respond to physical forces. And this potential was of tremendous interest to Klee, who was well-read in classical mechanics and applied this discipline to his theories of pictorial composition. Cultural historian Malika Mascarinec has shown that to Klee, mechanics did not necessarily entail mathematical rationalization, nor did it translate to the impersonal workings of industrial technologies. Rather, this field of knowledge informed the artist's radical approach to form, in, and as motion, one that his famous description of, and I quote, an active line out for a walk, moving freely without a goal, encapsulates well. Indeed, In the lecture notes that he assembled during his tenure at the Bauhaus, Klee supplemented the description of mechanics that he found in a dictionary with the contention that, quote, the usual state of things in space is the state of motion. Things do not rest around us, they move with us, unquote. To unpack this idea in his classes, Klee recurrently compared mechanical structures to organisms subject to the interplays of active, medial, and passive forces, and these are his terms. For example, in a lecture he delivered on February 13, 1922, Klee compared the human body to a kinetic apparatus, writing, quote, let us from now on visualize the organism as a machine for movement, in which the execution of movement and the will to move are promptly intertwined, end quote. He expounded this proposition by analyzing the interlocked yet distinct functions of various anatomical tissues that enable the movement of limbs. Bones, Klee suggests, appear to be the primary vehicles for movement, yet they are quite rigid and effectively static. It is the vigorous contraction of muscles that endows bones with motion, with tendons and ligaments acting as transmitters of muscular energy. Bodies thus move thanks to the concerted effort of disparate elements, which together respond to an animating impulse, or in Klee's words, a will to move. 2 weeks later, on February 27th, Klee deployed 3 additional examples to suggest that this kinetic impetus concerned art as much as bodies and machines. To him, lines, planes, and geometric forms also interact with one another, pushing and pulling in different directions and balancing each other out. He also posited that pictorial elements respond to physical forces like gravity and magnetism, and that they reflect the input of external agents like the viewer's wandering gaze, which he likens to an animal grazing a field. To explain his general idea of the animation of pictorial forms, he first compared the composition of a picture to the functions of a water mill, where the flow of water actively drives a wheel, which in turn moves a mechanical hammer. So his notes about the mill are here at left. These 3 powers, so the mill, the flow of water, and the wheel, Klee tells us, act in diverse ways but participate in a series of actions that similarly convert and organize energy. Then, and we move to the illustration at center, he goes over the relations that allow plants to blossom. He identifies the seed germinating in the ground as a principal trigger for the plant's growth, pushing a sprout through the dirt so that its leaves can derive photosynthetic nourishment from sunlight and eventually generate a flower. The combined actions of these factors urges the plant to flourish, even though each channels energy differently, whether producing, transferring, or receiving it. Lastly, when we move to the right, Klee turns to another anatomical model of movement, elucidating the operations of the organs and fluids that support human life. The vital impulse, he suggests, starts from the pumping heart, which compels the lungs to purify blood and propel it through the circulatory system. Moving through vehicles that jointly work to maintain the correct functioning of the body, blood emblematizes the essential force that sustains and perpetuates human existence. However disparate, these case studies aim to show that elements that act and react to one another within physical systems generate a chain of transformations according to a process of endless becoming. The progression of these examples in Klee's notes suggests that for the artist, machines like the mill manifest in simplified form the constant flux that animates bodies that breathe, grow, and morph according to their life cycles and in response to extrinsic stimuli. And likewise, Klee believed that students should approach their compositions as if they were machines or organisms, that is, as if they too were systems of interconnected parts subject to alterations and displacement over time. His lectures make clear that he attributed to seemingly static pictorial forms the same performative qualities as his automata. Only the smallest thing is without duration, the intrinsically dead point, Klee argues. And I'm quoting here. For this point to become movement and line, it takes time. The same applies with when this line shifts to a surface or when surfaces are set in motion to form spaces. End quote. As they come together to form a composition, pictorial elements behave similarly to animate organisms, or, to use Klee's own phrase, act as machines for movement. Even when they appear to be at rest, they are never still or self-contained. Their very nature derives from motion. To Klee, mechanical apparatuses, flourishing plants, and human anatomy all serve as lenses through which to create pictures that enact the same shifts and interactions that to him define life. In other words, Klee machines was inseparable from his even greater interest in the workings of biological creatures. Unlike Bauhaus colleagues such as Schlemmer, who imagined robotic figures that could replace and even surpass human bodies, Klee prized the shared capabilities of nature and technology, rejecting the notion that machines could successfully supplant living organisms. This stance comes to the fore in the drawing of a humanoid machine that he executed the same year as Twittering Machine in 1922, which he literally titled Automata. This robot is clearly anthropomorphic, equipped with a head, torso, and 4 limbs. However, unlike Bontemps' machine, it is far from naturalistic. Its clunky body hilariously contrasts with Klee's sophisticated descriptions of human anatomy in his notes. The head is empty but for the fuel that drips into a funnel. The facial organs are scattered as if detached from the skull. The arms are flaccid and deprived of hands, and penile appendages evoke scatological bodily functions. As such, the automaton pokes fun at contemporaneous projects that aim to substitute machines to human bodies. One example among many that would have been familiar to Klee was the theatrical production of Figure of Cabinet that Schlemmer staged at the Bauhaus in 1922, where the only actors were geometric silhouettes mounted on a conveyor belt. The drawing hints at Klee's skepticism about the potential of technology to recreate bodily properties. His lecture notes leave little doubt about his opinion in the sense, quote, "The machine's way of functioning is not bad, but life's way is something more. Life engenders and bears. When will the machine have babies?" End quote. Such a dismissal of the fantasy that machines could reproduce like living creatures further shows that Klee did not value automata for their potential to take over natural organisms. Rather, he cherished their ability to expose the physical events that, to him, form the basis of organic life. So to conclude, in Klee's writing, as in works like Twittering Machine, the machine emerges as a model for the kinetic relations that unfold when bodies and forces interact, and the picture as a realm in which forms actively respond to one another and external forces. These analogies indicate that the artist did away with distinctions between organic and inorganic agents, promoting a sense of kinship between fundamentally distinct structures that nonetheless share a capacity to act in the world. This approach contrasts with the notion of nature as a rationally designed mechanism that follows the dictates of an overarching intelligence, one which revealed itself in artifacts like Bontemps' automata. Rather, Klee's automata promote an alternative worldview whereby the ever-transforming component of the material world spontaneously react to one another and the space around them. This latter paradigm highlights the shared features of natural and artificial entities and comes to the fore in his early 1920s machine drawings. Such works emphasize movement, multisensoriality, and interactivity to reflect what Klee was so eager to achieve in the works of art. That is, an ability to mobilize dynamic systems that assert the embodied dimensions of lived experience. They also present nature and technology as complementary and interconnected categories, celebrating their mutual potential to express the underlying animation that Klee attributed to all things and beings.